Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Glad you could join us this week, and for our viewers watching who may still be dealing with that late winter snowstorm, we hope you're warming up and hanging in there. We're starting off the show this week by taking a look at what's making news in the markets, and Central Valley Ag's Luke Beckman joined me on Thursday morning. As we await the end of March USDA prospective plantings report and the market movements it could bring, we're also watching substantial corn purchases from China, South American harvest progress, and potentially positive trends in ethanol demand. And of course, time to get rolling on the 2021 planting season too. Luke and I talked about it all.
Well, typically, when you talk about price trends, the month of March, we typically see the market fade a little bit going into the end of the month. That's fairly common. We're seeing that now, really, where we found some attractive levels, new highs, new high closes, in new crop corn, and both of the bean contracts, old and new crop, just a week ago. But the markets have faded from that point. We've even had bullish inputs, with China stepping in and buying old crop corn 3 days this week, and the markets continue to fade. So it just feels like we're in that time period where there's a little bit of a news vacuum. The market is really just focused on, what's going to happen at the end of the month. We need new inputs for kind of that long-term direction in terms of what that balance sheet's going to look like, acres, being a huge component of that. So that's really the key thing from there. Typically we do see the markets seasonally find their legs and find some of the best pricing opportunities of the year, really April, May, June. So we're going to enter that 90-day stretch where it's a great opportunity for producers to continue to market old crop grain at good levels, depending on where they're at, and really take a look at those new crop months, because when that crop is young and at risk, it really presents the best opportunities to be marketing.
Next up, fuel demand, and I know that you're always tracking what's going on in ethanol. Are we looking at some positive trends here?
Yeah, ethanol has been a bright spot, really starting to turn around when you look at ethanol margins. That's been positive. They can have some good returns in the spot market. So we really expect, ethanol demand the second half of this marketing year to really take a step higher. So it'll be interesting to take a look at the USDA reports. How do they incorporate that knowledge? Do we see that demand number on the balance sheet start to tick higher? I think it'll be too early to tell. Would doubt the USDA does anything with that number, in the coming reports. But overall, that is a bright spot. We're also going to get to take a look at feed demand. The end of this month, we've got the quarterly stocks report as well. So typically you'll see, feed demand adjustments after quarterly stocks reports, just as the USDA gets more information on, what we have sitting around, every quarter.
Okay, let's look at South America. We've got harvest delays and quality concerns for soybeans, but harvest is ramping up, and that's going to come flooding into the markets pretty soon, won't it?
Yeah, South America has been kind of a mixed bag this year. You have a crop, both corn and beans, that's getting bigger in Brazil. They've had a better growing season. Obviously, they've had some complications, as of late with too much rain as they're trying to harvest their soybean crop and get their second crop corn acres in the ground. And then Argentina's really been, dry, and so poor crops in Argentina, better crops in Brazil. So you're gaining on one, losing on the other. Grand scheme of things, though, between those two countries, you're expecting record production in beans. You're expecting bigger production in corn this year. The question is really going to be, what does weather look like for second crop corn in Brazil? If old crop corn here in the U.S. is going to take that next leg higher, the market's going to be really keenly watching what weather looks like. Really producers in South America have had every incentive to expand acreage, and they've done that. Prices have encouraged additional acres to come into production, both here and abroad. So they're trying. Mother Nature's presented some challenges in South America, but we do expect big crops to come out of South America this year. Just kind of depends on how big, depending on how weather finishes things out, both in Brazil and Argentina.
And finally, Luke, anything you'd like to leave us with today in regards to selling strategies or marketing opportunities?
One of the strategies, Troy, that we've been talking about within our own team has really been minimum price and floor-based strategies. We haven't used a lot of these in the last 5 years because the markets just have not provided a lot of attractive, opportunities to put those in place. Really feels like we're in a price environment now where, you don't want to sell too soon. And this last year, kind of presented that to us where the market just continued to rally. The balance sheets are really set up to where we need to have good crops this year. So there is some opportunity for prices, especially on the new crop side, to rally. But of course, there's always those black swan events that are hanging out there that we really can't see that really present risks to our farming operations. And so, that kind of ushers in the opportunity to explore minimum price strategies where we make sales and we buy calls, or we buy puts, sell calls, as part of that strategy. So would encourage producers to look at that, as they think about selling the remainder of their old crop, or even putting some new crop strategies on that next 10 or 20% of your production to secure the profitable levels that we're at now, but give yourself some upside exposure.
Thanks to Luke. Next week, we'll be joined by author and analyst Elaine Cubb. Next up, for many producers, it's time to transition to the next growing season for corn and soybeans. And with that, farmers are encouraged to start formulating a plan to terminate the cover crops that were planted last fall. Best management practices will vary based on the fall planting date, spring growth conditions, and the goals established by the farmer or landowner. UNO Weed Management Extension Educator Chris Proctor joined me to discuss it.
When I think cover crops, maybe it's just because I spend time thinking about it, you start to think that a lot of folks are doing it. And I think it's increased quite a bit. I think the interest has certainly increased over time, but I'd say we're still probably under 10% as a state in terms of cover crop adoption. So it's still relatively low when you compare it to a practice that's been around like no-till, where we're probably closer to 40% for our state. So got a little ways to go, I suppose.
And people have lots of questions regarding the timing of terminating cover crops. So, that can depend on the type of objective that the farmer wants to get from those cover crops. That'll even depend on where you're at in the state when it comes to the timing. So what are some things that producers need to consider when it comes time to terminate those cover crops?
Yeah, the termination is tricky in that, like you say, there's a lot of factors that go into it. When I think termination, the crop you're growing, I think, has a big influence on that. So corn versus soybean are the ones that are most commonly grown in our state. And so thinking about those crops can have a big influence. So corn just doesn't tolerate a cover crop overlapping with it at planting time as much as soybean does. So we talk about planting green. Soybean tends to tolerate planting green a little bit more than corn. And so usually you want to be on the cautious side with corn and terminate a little bit earlier. But then some of your goals, so not just when you overlap with the cover crop in your crop, but when do you plant that next crop? Do you want to maximize your planting date of your corn crop or your soybean crop and get that in the last part of April and just really push it? Usually you won't have as much cover crop biomass, and so when I think about it, biomass drives a lot of the benefits we see in cover crops. So the longer we wait, the more biomass we get, and so there's a timing thing to it. We did a study a couple of years ago, and we looked at cover crop termination timing, and we went from early May to mid-May, and we doubled our biomass in 2 weeks that time of year. And so you can really gain a lot that time of year. And so those are some of the things that I think are helpful to think about.
And you said a little bit earlier when you're going to be planting corn. When you say a little bit earlier, I've read 10 to 14 days. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think if you want to be safe, I think 2 weeks is a pretty safe timing to use. I know there's people maybe that use cover crops more often. They've kind of figured it out for their system. They might push it a little bit and get closer to a week or a couple, 3-4 days. But 2 weeks is a pretty safe bet.
All right, so say we've got those herbicides, they're on there, but maybe for some reason you didn't get all of it. That can really impact yields if you don't terminate everything, right?
Yeah, no, it can have some negative effects because you have that green cover crop that just continues into your cash crop, and it starts to perform more like a weed in that case than it does a cover crop. There was a handful of years ago, it was a wheat stem maggot had actually migrated from cover crop into corn. A lot of that was due to this extended timing after termination where the cover crop remained green and the corn started to emerge, and so we had some of those pests actually move into the corn crop in that instance. And so depending on the year and the environment, sometimes those types of things will happen.
Chris also says it's a good idea for producers to consult with their crop insurance agents prior to terminating to get detailed rules for their county and crops. Next up, the Nebraska Land Link Program aims to connect new or beginning farmers and ranchers in search of land with landowners interested in leasing or selling that land to a new operator. Market Journal's Bill Dodd recently caught up with Extension Educator Allan Vyhnalek about the program and how you can get involved.
Farm and ranch succession and transition can be a tricky ordeal for farmers and ranchers who may be ready to hang their hats for good. Furthermore, a 2017 survey of 3,500 farmers by the National Young Farmers Coalition listed access to land as the most difficult challenge for new farmers. That's where the Nebraska Land Link Program comes into play.
So for the land seekers, if you're looking to get into agriculture, production agriculture, if you're looking to farm or ranch, if you don't have a family member that owns that ground or access to a ground through a family member, you likely don't have good access to ground. And so the Land Seeker program was trying to just create another way of communicating about what ground might be available in a certain area or areas of the state. For landowners, we know that about half do have somebody coming back to their operation, so that's good news. The other half may or may not have someone come back to the operation. In many cases, they don't. And if they want to keep their farm intact as its own production unit, and that's important to them to have XYZ ranch or XYZ farm continue, then they would maybe consider trying to provide an opportunity for one of the land seekers to come help them with their operation and eventually take over.
Not only does this program bolster the probability of a farm or ranch operation staying functional after the original operators have moved on, the program is also beneficial to businesses of rural towns and the overall economy of the state.
We know that in rural Nebraska, and any part of Nebraska for that matter, the whole state's relatively rural, that if we keep more operations going, we have better chance of those small towns and all of Nebraska to stay healthier. If we start losing operations out there, even though all the land's still being farmed and all the ranches are still being grazed, we will lose businesses on Main Street. We know that inherently. So if we keep more operations afloat, it's kind of the purest kind of rural development or the community development, just keep operations going without them becoming larger and larger and larger all the time.
While there are plenty of people in the program seeking land, there aren't too many looking to part with it. While many people seeking land may jump at an opportunity for a plot of new ground, landowners who are seeking operations for succession will have the ability to select which applicants they would prefer to work with.
So when an application is submitted, it comes into the database, and then that will generate an email that comes to me. I'll send back that person, the land seeker, the landowner, an email saying, hey, I want to visit with you. And when I visit with the folks, then after they submitted their application, I'm asking them things like, what did you mean by what you said by this answer? I'm trying to make sure the application is complete. I make sure I understand what they're seeking, or I'm offering what they're offering. I'm trying to just check it out in terms of making sure that I understand what they have there. I am not posting anything about any of their information online, either land seeker or landowner, not going online. But then as I have landowners register their land, I'll look at land seekers that might fit, and I'll send those seeker applications to the landowner, and the landowner can decide who they would like to visit with, or if they would like to visit with somebody, or if they'd like to interview them or have them come to the farm or ranch. They can do that at that time. I'll be out of the process. Everybody can pick their own, pick who they'd like to work with. But I'll be kind of the clearinghouse of that information going back and forth. I'm basically not going to deny anyone a chance to apply. And we'll let the landowners decide who they would like to visit with in terms of matching seekers, the actual match of the seeker to the landowner. As
of now, there is no cost to apply for the program in-state or out-of-state. However, a small fee may be appropriated for some out-of-state applicants once their application has been approved. Furthermore, if your application is accepted, it should be noted it could take some time before a proper match is found for your particular situation.
And I hope people understand that this will not be a quick fix. People have to need patience. If you apply as a land seeker, you may be in a system for a year or years before we get you to find you an appropriate landowner to match you with. And if you apply as a landowner, understand that I'll be probably sending you land seekers pretty much right away, but you have your choice of who you'd like to work with, and if none of those match, you don't have to accept them right away. We'll work on it. I look at it as a kind of a long-term process.
While many new farmers and ranchers will always be seeking new land, there may be several reasons a producer may want to turn their land over to a new generation. In either case, the Nebraska Land Link Program could give you a head start on the search for new land or tenants. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. To apply for the Land Link program, you can visit farm.unl.edu/landlink. You can also email Allan directly at Vyhnalek and the number 2 at unl.edu. We've got all this information on the Market Journal website as well. And here's a couple of landowners doing some good. Ruth and Sid Reedy of Scribner farm on land that has been in Ruth's family since 1905. And that's adjacent to the farm homesteaded by Ruth's great-grandfather. That's why the Reedies believe in sharing their love of the land and the farm with others. Sid does that with high school biology students he teaches at Logan View, and Ruth shares her farm knowledge, experience, and research with consumers through the group Common Ground. You can learn more about the Reedies' efforts in the March, Nebraska Farmer. And next up, calf scours pose a serious threat to ranchers during the calving season. In an effort to reduce loss, the Sandhills Calving System was born. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh spoke with UNL veterinarian Halden to learn more.
With calving season nearly upon us, producers are looking for ways to reduce loss and care for the newborn calves. One disease, called calf scours, can be contracted very early in a calf's life and cause major loss in a herd.
So calf scours means diarrhea in calves, and we typically see it under 1 month of age. That is when calves are most at risk of getting a case of scours. It can range in severity anywhere from just a little bit of a loose stool all the way up to a severe case that can result in dehydration and the death of the calf. There's a long list of pathogens that can cause calf scours. It includes bacteria like E. coli, Salmonella. Those are some of the common bacterial ones. There are protozoa like Cryptosporidium, and then there are even viruses like rotavirus, and there's a bovine coronavirus that can cause calf scours as well.
To find a way to keep calves safe from scours, extension specialists looked at the dairy industry. Using the knowledge of how they separate calves, the Sandhills Calving System was soon developed and implemented in western Nebraska.
One of the main ways that they prevent calf scours is by keeping calves separate, especially through that first 1 month of age. They typically keep them separated for 1 to 2 to 3 months, depends on their system. But in beef herds, we obviously don't keep calves separated from each other. But one of the things we can do that really helps break the chain of transmission from older calves to younger calves is separating groups of cattle by age of the calf. So especially if we separate groups of calves during calving season into 1 week cohorts, meaning all the calves born within 1 week of time, if they can go to a separate area and then the next group go to a different area, then that can break the chain of transmission. So that chain of transmission is one of the main risk factors, meaning older calves are going to shed some of these scours causing pathogens, and then the younger calves will pick up those pathogens and amplify it. So when a lot of calves are born over a period of time, several months in one small space, that's one of the main risk factors. That's one of the main ways to get a scours outbreak going. So breaking that chain of transmission is really the best method we have for preventing scours in beef calves.
The Sandhills Calving System has already proven to be an effective method in practice, with one operation reporting 0 death loss after implementation.
So looking back at the data from when Sandhills Calving was developed, there were 2 herds in western Nebraska that were really struggling with losing a lot of calves to scours. And when they implemented Sandhills Calving, their scours death loss dropped to 0 in those 2 herds. So it's a very powerful method when it's initiated wholeheartedly and it's carried out completely. It's extremely effective. It's the most effective method in preventing scours that we know of.
While not all operations can use the system, thinking of older calves' manure as dangerous to younger calves can help producers plan out the safety of their herds. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. It's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, I mentioned it at the top of the show. Some of us saw some pretty heavy snow amounts this past week. What's ahead for us as we move through this last full week of March?
Well, Troy, we not only had the heavy snow, but we also had excessive rainfall across a good portion of central and eastern Nebraska. Widespread 2+ inch totals and liquid equivalency of this precipitation event through the Panhandle all the way through eastern Nebraska, with a centric core of 4 to 6 inches reported. Portions of south central, central, and east central Nebraska. The highest precipitated totals for this storm that we could find so far was reported at around 6.9 inches just to the east of Hastings, and also around the Benedict area we're about 6.78 inches. At least 8 stations reported storm totals in excess of 6 inches. So this is a very big precipitation event, pretty much eliminated any deficits that we've seen across the broad section from central through eastern Nebraska. In terms of our soil moisture recharge period, that's October to present. We actually got some surpluses now. And as we go to the 9 and 12 month periods, really the northeast, the southwest, and the panhandle have the biggest deficits, and it'll take a couple more events before we start to see some recovery in that hydrological portion of the equation. But for the agricultural port, which is basically looking at the surface moisture, we're in pretty good shape, and we have additional precipitation opportunities over this next week. So I would look for some further improvements in some areas of the state. As we go to the upper air model, once again, another trough beginning to enter the western United States, and that's going to be our weather maker early next week as it begins to shift toward the east. Some energy rotating around that trough will start to bring and start to energize this low pressure at the surface over the southern Rockies, and this will eventually start to merge out into the plains as we get into the early part of the next week. So we are looking at precipitation breaking out from the northern through the central Rockies, and as we get into tomorrow, this trough digs a little deeper and begins to shift eastward, and we start to see the formation of a surface load across northern Texas. This will start to pump Gulf moisture up into the central plains, and most of the precipitation, at least on Sunday, will be confined to the central and northern Rockies. By the time we get into Monday morning, we start to see this low ejecting out toward Kansas City, and this wraparound moisture will start to generate a widespread precipitation event across the eastern half of the state with the potential for some strong thunderstorm activity. By the time we get into Tuesday, that upper air low is shifted basically up into the northern plains region. That will create a fairly significant weather event across Minnesota and the Dakotas, heavy precipitation, so we will see some drought relief to the north of us, and most of that pattern will shift off to our east as we get into Wednesday as the flow starts to split. The northern stream moves toward the Great Lakes. The southern stream will move across the southeast. We will start to see some clearing conditions here in the central plains as high pressure builds in. Most of the snowfall will remain basically up into the northern plains and heavy rainfall to the east. Then we get some ridging taking place during the Wednesday-Thursday period in our region, bringing some warmer conditions, but yet another trough starts to make its way into the western United States with surface lows developing over the central and southern Rockies. We see widespread snowfall starting to develop in the northern Rockies, heavy precipitation in the eastern Great Lakes. And by the time we get to Friday, that trough starts to make its way into the western portions of Texas, and we see the first low starting to migrate out of that trough, situated once again near the Kansas City, going to bring widespread snowfall and precipitation to the Black Hills in western Nebraska. And eventually, as we get into late next weekend, we may see a widespread precipitation events once again materialize across the central plains. Looking farther out, with that trough in place, of course, we would expect to see things tilt toward below normal temperatures. And in regards to precipitation, the models are definitely showing drier conditions, but overall, from the standpoint of the GFS model, I think this is way overdone, and we're going to actually see above normal moisture. So overall, more rain in the forecast.
Thanks, Al. Finally today, working with forages can often mean straddling the line between agronomy and animal science. That's the case for Nebraska Extension's Ben Beckman. He's currently part of a project working with South Dakota State University Extension for field days and forage demonstrations. The topic of interest for a field day this year is silage storage. With it, educators are exploring silage storage and the impact it has on the final result for producers. And they're asking for your input to make the field day information presented as informative and relevant as possible.
And we'd really like to have some producer input on any producers that use fermented feeds, use silage of some sort. It doesn't have to be corn silage necessarily. It could be a small grain, it could be a forage sorghum, sorghum silage. And I guess specifically what topics and areas in the storage of that are interested. Whether that's, covering, inoculants, the pack density, and chop length are kind of the 4 different areas that we're trying to look at and see what we can bring to the table in terms of information, and just, like I said, some demonstrations on how that impacts the final product that we get from chopping silage when we utilize some of those practices, and then what the economics of utilizing those practices look like too. But again, we can't do all of them all at once. So we'd really like to make this relevant to our producers in the state. So any feedback that we could get is going to help drive this forward and which areas we need to focus on.
You can take the survey at ffday.questionpro.com. It'll take just a few minutes and will be a great help to the researchers. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app, or you can follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.